Joey Logano versus Ross Chastain steals the show late, but early on, it was Bubba Wallace versus Kyle Larson that got the whole world talking. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. We've made it to the round of 8. Today we're talking all things Las Vegas. We have so much to get to. We'll talk about that thrilling battle for the win down the stretch between playoff drivers Joey Logano and Ross Chastain. We'll discuss other playoff drivers who unfortunately ran into trouble. We'll talk about some underdogs. We'll look at the point standings, but we've got to begin with the incident that took place between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson early in stage 2. We've talked a lot about NASCAR officiating in recent weeks, and this week their job just got even harder. Because I believe Bubba Wallace should be suspended for at least one race. I'll explain why in a moment, but in case you didn't see the incident live, I'll catch you up real quick. While racing hard inside the top 5, Kyle Larson drove in hard going into turn 3, slid up the racetrack, did not give Bubba Wallace much room on corner exit, squeezed the 45 car into the outside wall. Immediately after that contact, Bubba Wallace shoots down the racetrack and hits Kyle Larson in the right rear. Both drivers go sliding up into the outside wall hard, collecting playoff driver Christopher Bell, an innocent bystander in the process. Both drivers, thankfully, were able to get out of their race cars under their own power. Bubba Wallace immediately began walking towards Kyle Larson's car, and when he reached Larson, began shoving him almost immediately. You can see here Larson really wanting nothing to do with Bubba, but Bubba gets a few pushes in. Right there in full view of the main grandstand, eventually the two separated themselves and both went to the infield care center. That's the incident. Now, NASCAR, before the end of this race, confirmed that they will be reviewing this entire incident later this week to determine if any penalties should come from it. You already know my take. Bubba Wallace should be suspended. Let's start at the beginning. Bubba Wallace has every right to be upset with Kyle Larson. It was Kyle Larson who drove it in really hard, slid up the racetrack, and put Bubba Wallace in a very vulnerable position. Sure, Bubba could have lifted out of the gas, but he wouldn't have had to if Kyle Larson didn't just slide up as if no one was there. Larson made the mistake. Bubba Wallace has every right to be upset with how he was raced in that moment. However, the decision to mash the gas, as NBC proved during the broadcast showing Bubba's telemetry, and hook Larson in the right rear, sending him headfirst towards the outside wall in the dogleg at one of NASCAR's fastest tracks, that is not a justifiable reaction. Especially when you consider the context. NASCAR has held not one but 2 full-on safety meetings with all the drivers in the past week. You cannot go out the very next day and right rear hook someone at 160 miles per hour. You just can't do that. That's dumb. Right rearing someone at Las Vegas Motor Speedway is bad enough, but then when Bubba Wallace gets out of the car and confronts Kyle Larson and immediately starts shoving him, did right rear hooking and nearly injuring him not get your point across? You're not winning anyone over by going up there and starting to shove the guy. And to make things even worse, on top of all this, Bubba Wallace's overreaction cost a Toyota teammate in the playoffs valuable points. Christopher Bell was 4th in stage 1, was running in the top 5, top 10 all day long. He had a car capable of winning, potentially pointing his way into the championship race, and he DNF'd. He finished 34th today because of this stunt pulled by Bubba Wallace. So you right rear hook somebody into the outside wall at one of NASCAR's fastest tracks, then you got out of your car and started shoving the guy in front of the entire grandstands, and you wrecked one of your Toyota teammates who is in a tense and tight championship battle. Bubba Wallace should be suspended. Noah Gragson got a 30-point penalty earlier this year for spinning Sage Karam intentionally at Road America, a much slower track. I know other cars ended up being involved in that accident, but if Noah Gragson's gonna get 30 points for that, in my opinion, Bubba Wallace should get at least 50. You just can't lose your cool like that on Sunday during a NASCAR Cup Series playoff race. That could have ended Kyle Larson's career. I know a couple years ago, that line may have sounded a bit overdramatic, but with what we've seen this year, with Alex Bowman missing several races and counting, with Kurt Busch just announcing his retirement at least a whole year earlier than he wanted to, I don't think that's an exaggeration. I hope NASCAR sets the right standard here, and I hope the appeals panel, should they listen to it, I hope they uphold whatever NASCAR enacts. Of course, the appeals panel overturned NASCAR's, justified in my opinion, 25-point penalty they gave William Byron for spinning Hamlin out on purpose under caution. I hope they give Bubba a hefty penalty for this, and I hope the appeals panel upholds it. I'm not sure I'm confident either will happen, but I hope that's what happens at least. That's my opinion. I like Bubba Wallace. He's a very emotional guy, and in some ways that's great. He's more relatable. In some cases, he feels more grounded than your average star athlete. But his emotions have also gotten him into trouble in the past. In the past, he's admitted to wrecking people on purpose and got a fine for that. He splashed Powerade on Alex Bowman after the race with medical personnel around. I like Bubba, but unfortunately he's prone to emotional outbursts like this. I saw a lot of people giving him crap for his post-race interview, his infield care center interview with NBC, where he claimed the steering was broken, that he did not intentionally mean to hit Kyle Larson, and I don't blame Bubba Wallace for those comments one bit. A lot of people were. I actually don't. He knows what he's supposed to say there. If he admits, yeah, of course I was mad at Larson, I had to show him my displeasure, he's getting suspended, easy peasy. This is a business decision. Those comments were a business decision. No different than when Matt Kenseth said, oh, I blew a right front when he wrecked Joey Logano. I don't blame Bubba Wallace at all for saying what he said during that interview, but I hope NASCAR takes swift and significant action, and I hope the appeals panel upholds it. That's really all I can say. I know that's arguably the biggest story from this race, but I do want to move on because we saw a fantastic race. The first 6 weeks of these playoffs have not been good, by and large. Talladega was a pretty good race, even though there wasn't, your typical Talladega big one. But outside of Talladega, there have been a lot of stinkers, and there have been a lot of confusing and frustrating moments mixed in. So today's race at Las Vegas was a breath of fresh air, by and large. Let's talk about the winner, Joey Logano, the first driver to lock himself into the championship race at Phoenix. This is his 5th Championship 4 appearance, which ties him with Martin Truex Jr., Kyle Busch, and Kevin Harvick for the most all time. Now, of course, the Knockout Round Championship 4 format has only been around since 2014. This is the 9th season of this system, or at least a version of this system, but Logano having made it 5 out of 9 years, that's a pretty darn good ratio. So congratulations to him. Paul Wolfe, as crew chief, played the right strategy down the stretch. There was a string of cautions in the final 40, 50 laps or so, and towards the end, Logano chose to pit for 4 fresh tires. He got a great final restart with, about 16 laps to go, worked his way up into the top 5, then the top 3. He passed Chase Briscoe for second with about 10 laps to go, and ran down Ross Chastain, making the final pass for the victory with 3 or 4 laps to go. Chastain put up a fight. It was fire fighting fire. 2 of the most aggressive drivers on the circuit, racing each other hard, but I think mostly fair. Chastain, when Logano first got a run down the front stretch, threw a nasty block up to the outside wall. Reminded me of when Kenseth threw a block on Logano at Kansas way back when. Chastain didn't get spun for his trouble, no. In fact, he continued to block Logano all the way up to the wall in the center of turns 1 and 2. Logano, I think knowing he had a much faster car and had enough laps to work on it, didn't push the issue. He kept waiting, looking for an opening. Eventually, he was able to make his move. Joey Logano's moving on to the championship 4. This really felt like a Team Penske day. Joey Logano and his teammate Ryan Blaney seemed to be the class of the field. Ross Chastain and his Trackhouse teammate Daniel Suarez were never far off. But Joey Logano, who's had success at Las Vegas in the past, does it again. Really fun racing down the stretch. Here are your top finishers. Ross Chastain did hold on to finish second. Both drivers contending for a championship 4 spot. Ross Chastain, at the very least, collects a lot of points. Kyle Busch finishes a solid 3rd. I thought he might Fontana 2013 it for a second and swoop in when the 2 leaders made contact, or what he did at Bristol Dirt this year when Reddick and Briscoe made contact and he got the win. I was waiting for Kyle Busch to steal one, didn't quite get that opportunity. Still finishes a very solid 3rd, considering he had to come back from a spin, which I guess was the driver just getting loose, and then a wheel falling off late in the race. Yeah, honestly, now that I'm looking, I need to look at the last restart again. How did Kyle Busch get up to 3rd? Heck of a rally, quite honestly. Behind him, Chase Briscoe. This, aside from the 2 leaders, this was the story of the playoffs so far. Chase Briscoe comes into this round as the truest underdog, and he lived up to that name early on, running outside the top 25. He went a lap down, straight up, at one point earlier in this race. He was just way off. Throughout this year, the 14 team just has not had the raw speed that many of the other championship contenders in this round have had. And early on today, that was showing once more. But they continued to fight. They continued to battle. Occasionally played some pit strategy to gain track position late. They worked their way back into the lead lap, then snuck their way into the top 15, then the top 10. Suddenly, they're on the front row and actually took the lead by about half a car length over Justin Haley, I think before the last or second to last restart. Ross Chastain made a crazy 3-wide pass on the bottom when Briscoe and Haley were side by side, or else Chase Briscoe may have had a shot to hold off Joey Logano himself for the win. So 4th place, helps him a little in the points, but we'll look at the points in a second. Briscoe so far back coming into this round and didn't collect any stage points today. He's going to need more of this, a lot more of this these next 2 weeks if he actually wants to advance to Phoenix, but this was a step in the right direction. It was a story. Denny Hamlin ends up 5th. I was expecting Toyota to be a little more dominant today, and granted, Christopher Bell may have had a car capable of the win. He got crashed out early, like I mentioned. Kyle Busch did come back to finish 3rd. Hamlin started 31st, completely missed it in qualifying, but slowly but surely worked his way towards the front. He ends up 5th, which really was the best he ran all day. I think he stayed out or took 2 tires at one point to lead a lap here or there, but really he was probably a 5th to 8th place car by the end of this thing, so solid result, decent points day. I want to give a shout out to both colleague cars. Justin Haley, I mentioned, was battling with Chase Briscoe for the win late. He ended up fading to 14th, but Justin Haley had a legit top 10 car today. He's been quietly really strong the last few weeks. Just want to give him some credit. Allmendinger does get a top 10. Also Noah Gragson filling in for Alex Bowman, finishes 11th. Not too bad. William Byron was in the top 10 most all of today, but he ends up slipping to 13th. Collected some stage points at least, but gonna need to do a little better. Gonna need to finish these races the next 2 weeks if he wants to advance to Homestead, to Phoenix. Can't believe I just made that mistake. One playoff driver you do not see anywhere near the top 15 is Chase Elliott. Boy, what happened out there today? Chase Elliott fans who are listening closely to Alan Gustafson, the whole team on the radio, what happened today? Qualified in the teens, okay, figured he'd work his way into the top 10 pretty quick. He's been the most consistently fast car and driver all year long, right? No, instead he faded to 20th and then stayed there all day. Chase Elliott ends up 21st. He comes into this round the points leader because he was the regular season champion. He's got more wins than anyone else, but boy, he's used up just about his entire cushion in race 1. A race that, while he wasn't my pick to win, I figured he'd be a top 5, at least a top 10 guy. No, he just ran 20th. Not bad luck, didn't run into trouble, get caught up in a wreck, bad pit stop. No, he just ran 20th and finished 21st. Shocking. I haven't done the calculations, but before today, Chase Elliott's average finish these playoffs is 17th. That's not that good. That is below average. That is subpar. It's even worse after today because he finished 21st. So they got to turn things around. They had a tremendous regular season, but they have been all or nothing in the playoffs. They got that win at Talladega, but outside of that win, they have one top 10, the other 5 playoff, now the other 6 playoff races. Only 2 top 10s total through the first 7 playoff races for the regular season champion. That is completely different than what we saw throughout most of the regular season. So 9 team, gonna have to find some of that speed and consistency fast. You also won't see Ryan Blaney's name here. He finished 28th after a wreck. Still not exactly sure what happened, but he was battling for second in the later portions of this race. I mentioned him with Joey Logano earlier. They seem to be the 2 best cars most of the day. Blaney just got loose, got up into the outside wall, spun out, hit the inside wall pretty hard, broke some stuff, ended up finishing this race multiple laps down. It seemed like just a mistake. Car wasn't handling just right, and the driver just overstepped it ever so slightly. I'd say bad luck, but I mean, it's just a mistake. The mistake you really cannot make in this round of 8 if you want to make it to the championship. And in the case of Ryan Blaney, hasn't won a points-paying race all year long. I thought today might be the day. He was fastest in practice. Yes, he had that tire issue after about lap 30, but we saw no tire issues today. Seemed like everybody figured out the right air pressure strut, and in Blaney's case, they were still one of the fastest cars in the field. Midway through this race, I thought Blaney was the favorite, and then he crashed. Shocking, just a huge plot twist. Am I forgetting anyone else? I don't think so. I mentioned Christopher Bell had a lot of speed, but got caught up in the Bubba Wallace, Kyle Larson melee. He ends up finishing 34th. Let's go ahead and transition and look at the point standings. Here's how things look going into Homestead next week, the second race of this 3-race round of 8. I'm not going to say Bell is in a must-win, minus 23, but if I'm Adam Stevens, if I'm calling the races the next couple weeks, I'm focused on that finish line. If you can get some stage points early on, great, go for it, but I think Bell's got to go for wins. I think he's a favorite at Homestead Miami Speedway. Martinsville is a huge question mark, but I'm not counting Christopher Bell out. We saw what he did just a week ago at the Charlotte Roval, winning in a must-win scenario. He did it once. It may be a lot asking him to do it twice in the same postseason, but he has the proven track record, so I'm not going to count Christopher Bell out. I mentioned Chase Briscoe. Finished top 5 today and is still minus 9, so he's going to need stage points, he's going to need more top 5s. He came in at a disadvantage, so he needs to exceed expectations this round to move on, minus 9. I passed Ryan Blaney due to that wreck. He's now minus 11. Yikes. And then there's William Byron minus 6. Joey Logano at the top is the only driver locked in. Chase Elliott still has a small point cushion. I mean, I guess 17 points isn't small, but he entered this round with like a 30-something point cushion, so he cut that thing in half with a subpar NASCAR run today. Gonna need to turn things around pretty quick. Can't run 20th the rest of this round and move on, in my opinion. Ross Chastain, really impressive. Plus 18 on both Trackhouse cars, really impressive. It's a shame Suarez had the power steering issue last week, or else we would have been talking about him as a threat to make it to the championship race at Phoenix today. So a lot to be excited about over there at Trackhouse. There are the playoff standings going into Miami next week, the third to last race of the entire season. I feel like there's still so much more we could go over today. The near misses, Byron bottoming out going into turn one shortly after restart and almost taking out Ryan Blaney. Reddick versus Suarez late, with Suarez getting arrow tight or arrow loose, I guess, behind Reddick and spinning out. Lots of close racing, lots of competitive racing, and lots of drivers being forced into mistakes. The next gen car once again delivered at an intermediate track, and this time without the random tire failures. This really was a fantastic race, a much needed race, these playoffs, which have been, like I said earlier, just full of nonsense. I mean, we did get some nonsense. The Bubba Wallace thing, nonsense. That was the big controversy. But outside of that, the rest of the racing was fantastic. I love me a multi-groove intermediate track with a good 1 to 2 seconds of tire fall off over the course of a run. That's what we got at Las Vegas Motor Speedway today. It was a fantastic race. Let's put this thing on the groovy gauge. Maybe it's just because most of the last few weeks have been frustrating or bad or disappointing, but this race feels pretty close to a perfect score. Because of the Bubba Wallace shenanigans, I can't go 100%, but I'm going to go, in honor of Kurt Busch announcing he is stepping away from full-time Cup Series racing, we'll go 97%, the number he won a championship with, I guess. This was a fantastic race, one of the better races we've seen in quite some time. This is what the next gen has thrived at this year, mile and a halfs. Specifically, mile and a halfs that already have a couple of grooves built in, that wear the tires a bit. Basically, mile and a halfs that aren't Texas Motor Speedway. This car has excelled. Today was no different. I had a great time watching. It seemed like the crowd out in Las Vegas was pretty good. I know they've covered a lot of their grandstands, a lot of their seats in recent years, but the seats that were there seemed mostly full, and I thought NBC did a good job cutting to and from the crowd, especially during the Kyle Busch loose wheel thing. They love to show the fans cheering whenever Kyle Busch has misfortune. It's kind of cruel at this point. Some of the shots during the Bubba Larson thing, I thought NBC did a pretty good job. A couple of ill-timed full-screen commercials, and they cut away from the post-race coverage after interviewing Logano. We never got a Ross Chastain interview, never interviewed anybody else. They sent the post-race coverage to Peacock. I understand that. I'm glad that there is post-race coverage, but today's race was only like 3 hours and 6 minutes long. Like, that's a fairly short race. How are we backed up against the TV window so closely? Like, you would hope NBC would block out a slightly bigger chunk on Sunday afternoon for a NASCAR Cup Series playoff race, so that's just a minor criticism, but a criticism nonetheless. I had a good time. There's not much that's going to ruin my spirits after this great NASCAR event. Share your thoughts down in the comment section below. I know we covered a lot. Logano versus Chastain in the closing laps, a great battle. Blaney, Bell running into trouble. Elliott just running 20th. I just don't get it. How does that even happen this late in the season? Of course, the Bubba Wallace, Kyle Larson incident. Lots to react to, lots to discuss. Go for it, guys. Hit the comments below. That is going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss any upcoming content. And as always, a big thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys go above and beyond to support the show each and every month. I greatly appreciate it. We'll be back later this week. Some pretty big news breaking earlier this afternoon. We'll talk about that and likely much, much more. Thanks for watching, y'all. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend.